Hello, I am Judith Panera, Executive Director for the AAMC and AAMC Foundation. The AAMC Foundation offices are in Manhattan and New York City, and today I am speaking to you from Brooklyn, New York. Locations situated upon the unceded, seized territory of the Lenape and Canarsie peoples, and benefited from the economies of slavery and the labors of African-descended captives. We owe our existence and vitality to generations from around the world who were brought here against their will, drawn here to escape persecution, and some that have lived on this land for more generations than can be counted. We pay respect to their communities, past and present. This acknowledgement asks each of us to consider the many legacies of violence, displacement, migration, and settlement that bring us here together today. AAMC is dedicated to an environment in which all individuals are treated with respect and dignity at our programs. Each individual has the right to be in a professional atmosphere that prohibits discriminatory practices, including harassment. Our full code of conduct policy for all our programs, as well as the outlets to make a direct or an anonymous report of a violation, has been posted in the chat feature. It is a pleasure to welcome you to today's virtual discussion. We hope that you and our community of colleagues, allies, and supporters around the globe are healthy and safe. Thank you to our attendees for making space in their schedule to join us, and we give gratitude to our speakers and to our partners in creating this program. We are truly grateful. And now to begin, I hand it to you, Lauren.
Thank you so much. So today we're going to be talking about digital engagement. Now, digital engagement may mean different things to different people, and how we define digital engagement is dependent on the context and conditions of the institutions we operate within and the communities that we serve. Over the next 40 or so minutes, we're going to be talking with our panelists about the challenges that we are collectively facing and how we might delve beyond surface level how-to responses and address the key mindset and cultural shifts needed within our sector. We will use our time to foster a conversation around 3 core areas. Now, while we're talking, we encourage you to use the Q&A in the bottom right of your Zoom screen to submit questions. We're going to reserve the last 15, 20 minutes of our time with you today to respond to your questions to the best of our ability. So before I begin, I'd like the panelists to briefly introduce themselves, and we will go in order of what is on our next slide. So Catherine, over to you.
Great. Thank you so much, Lauren and Judith. Thank you so much for the invitation today. My name is Catherine Devine. I work for Microsoft, but I come out of the museum industry. In my role at Microsoft, I look globally at what the needs of museums and libraries are with respect to digital transformation and technology. But as many of you may know me, I come out of the museum industry where I spent 8 years at the American Museum of Natural History in New York. So thank you so much for the opportunity today.
Hello, good morning, afternoon, evening, wherever you are in the universe. I am Sandra Jackson Dumont, and I am the Director and CEO of the Lucas Museum. I'm speaking to you from Los Angeles, and I want to begin by acknowledging the Tongva people, the indigenous people of this great land where I stand, and they are the original stewards of this territory. And so it's with gratitude that I speak from this place.
Hey everybody, my name is Nikhil Trivedi. My pronouns are he, him. I'm the Director of Engineering at the Art Institute of Chicago, and I'm talking to you from just outside of Chicago, a place that's seen as a traditional homelands of the Council of the Three Fires, the Ojibwe, the Odawa, and the Potawatomi nations. I pay respects to the long history of folks who have stewarded these lands and these waters, past, present, and future.
And Marie, go ahead.
Good afternoon, everyone. Hello. I am joining you from South Florida, Miami to be specific. And my name is Marie Vickles. I am the Director of Education at the Perez Art Museum Miami, also known as the PAM. And I'm also a curator here in South Florida, as well as internationally, and I curate locally at the Little Haiti Cultural Complex here in Little Haiti, Miami. Thanks for having me.
It's a pleasure to have all of you. My name is Lauren Vargas, and I'm going to be the facilitator today, the moderator. I'm an independent researcher and consultant. I am currently affiliated with the University of Leicester with the 1 by 1 project, building digitally competent museums. So let's get started because we have a lot of meaty topics that we are going to delve into today. And so to really set the scene for our conversation, we have to address the challenges that we have faced, that we continue to face, the new challenges that have arisen as a result of the events of 2020. So I'd like for each of the panelists to consider reflecting on those challenges by completing the statements, I wish, I wonder, I like. Marie, would you get us started?
Sure, thanks. Gosh, I wish. Just thinking about like the personal to the collective, we've all been moved out of, you know, respective spaces that we work in or work out of. I know right now I could say I wish there wasn't construction in my apartment at this moment, but also, you know, I wish on a larger scale, I wish that, you know, this moment will bring us all a little bit more closer to one another in ways that it seems maybe unlikely, because honestly, we've been pushed apart because of, you know, having to stay inside of our homes, no matter, you know, if they're great places to stay or otherwise, having to work from out of your home if you have that luxury to do so, or having to still go out to work and maybe put yourself and loved ones at risk. So I just wish that this moment brings us like closer to each other and more reflective and just aware of what is really important, you know, why we are doing the work we do, the work we're all so passionate about. In terms of I mean, there are some things that have come out of this time frame, just thinking back to the month of March to now, here we are in December. It's 2020 is almost over. I like that we have been able to see that not everything that we deemed necessary is actually necessary. A lot of the assumptions we made about having to, whether it's be in a specific place to work, or, you know, things have always run a certain way, so that's why we do them this way. All of those things have been thrown out the window. And we've been able to really reassess like what is important, what's necessary. And then I wonder if we will, you know, use this as a moment to move forward and on to better and more beautiful things, or if we will revert back to some of the old patterns that we probably shouldn't have. So that might sum it up for me at this moment.
Thank you so much. Who would like to tackle those three statements? Who'd like to go next?
Oh, I'm
Catherine.
happy to.
Yeah.
Am I on mute? Yes. Well, I think I'd like to understand, maybe I'll start with the positive, right? I think out of every crisis, it's good to look at the opportunity, to look at the silver lining. And I must say that in terms of what I like what the possibilities are, and I liked seeing how this particular industry is embracing those possibilities in a way that may not have happened without the crisis. And so I think about things like accessibility, and I know that's a big conversation today about equity and access and inclusion, and the idea of how does technology actually not just exist for technology's sake, but technology actually allows for providing more access. And that's what we're all about. So maybe I'll start with the positive side. Or maybe I'll go back to the negative then, which is, I wish we were not as divisive as we are, particularly in this country. I have a global view. So my days are very interesting because I switch pretty much every hour from one country to another. And so I'm always adjusting in culture. The divisiveness that exists in the United States is very challenging. And I wonder why that is. And I wonder why is it that that we are so divisive, and why we can't find our way out of it. But, you know, maybe that's, I'll finish there and let others speak, but that's my perspective on this issue.
I can have a go at the 3 questions. So I wish, you know, throughout the course of this year, I've seen how significant and important human connection is for all of us. Isolation is just really, really hard. And it just, you know, I just get emotional just naming that. And it's sort of illuminated for me just how deeply important human connection is for each of us. So I wish for stronger and deeper connections for each of you and everybody who's on the call today. I wonder, a lot has changed in the past year, and something that has been demonstrated to me this past year is how quickly change can really happen. Like when it needs to happen, change can happen on a dime. And I'm always one with a long vision, looking really far into the future and sort of recognizing that transformation and change at the foundational level takes a long time. But when it needs to happen, change can happen really fast. So in this context, I'm wondering about what new dynamics have arisen within our organizations and the ways we work with each other over the past year, and what dynamics are not new. A lot of us, you know, I'm speaking for myself, working in a really large art museum, you know, our organizational culture is really siloed and hierarchical. And we, like many other institutions, museums, and otherwise, have a long overdue reckoning with how we've benefited from historical traumas like those that have been named on this call previously: genocide of indigenous people, slavery. Museums are institutions that have directly benefited from war and genocide. And we have a long overdue reckoning of that. And that's not a new thing that's come out this year. That's been present for as long as our institutions have. So the combination of those two things, sort of like the hierarchical and siloed nature in which we exist, and sort of these areas in which we have a long overdue reckoning, like articulate to me that all the challenges we face when we think of digital in this new environment are at the same time organizational cultural challenges. How are we equipping staff at all levels, volunteers and boards, with the tools to talk about race and to sort of operate and do our work through anti-racist, anti-sexism lenses? How are we fostering connection with each other and building relationships to break down the silos and the hierarchies that make work so difficult, what digital or otherwise? Those are the things that I wonder about. And I like seeing how creatively I've seen people filling the most basic human needs we have in our lives today. There's just been a lot of really beautiful and new ways that I've seen people finding connection in this environment where we can't like be with each other in person.
Thank you. Sandra.
So I have so many wishes, and I'm sure they'll come out throughout the rest of this Zoom call, but let's see. I wish for us to continue to acknowledge what is real versus what is manufactured. For example, it is truly for me startling that we are just now having the conversations in a major way about the realities that everyone's already discussed prior to me, the realities of like cultural issues within cultural institutions. So how people behave and are treated and are engaged within cultural institutions. That has become very transparent because people have made it transparent. And these times have made it so that folks are a bit more brave than they normally would be. And so I wish that we continue to be brave. I wish that with that bravery, we'll have hopefulness, but I also wish that we will continue to have the most transparent, pointed dialogues about how our conversations really need to manifest into actions. I hope, or not, see, I'm already going into hopefulness. Let's see, I wish, I wonder whether or not institutions, as they start to come out of, or as we start to come out of this moment, I wonder if we will remember kind of what we learned from this moment and make it a part of our everyday existence and a way of being. So for example, it should be normalized that Nikhil's kid could walk through the background and it not be seen as some strange thing. It should just be normal. And it should be normal that Marie has construction going on in the background, but it should be, so I wonder if people will see her as someone who can focus through that and finish her sentences despite having a jackhammer outside her window. And so I wonder if we will embrace what we've learned about each other and learned about how transparent our discipline is right now. And I like the fact that people have been courageous enough to have deeper levels of discussion that have been reserved for the recesses of our kitchens and our family comfortable spaces, because they actually are the stories that we bring from work to home, and our families have to wrestle with them versus us being able to wrestle with them as a structural issue that tied to all the things that Nicole mentioned: racism, equity, inclusion, performance, all those things. And so I'm very hopeful about the future, tempered with the realities of the present and I guess the past.
How beautifully put from all of you. I can definitely echo that. I like that we are able to have events like this that are bringing us together on a more frequent basis, that we're not just tied to our physical conferences and waiting to meet or be exposed to new ideas and new people and new voices. And I think that today's webinar, today's following or gathering is a symbol of what is to come, how we meld together different voices, different perspectives, and continue to do so even after we come out of the pandemic. I do wish that while we are fostering these types of connections, although they may be flat and not that those physical connections that we're so used to or yearning for right now, I do wonder or wish that we take time to carve out the space to reflect on how we think about digital civility. The way in which we speak to each other, the way in which we collaborate with each other, the way in which we show up online. That takes a whole different, set of skills, a set of vulnerability to be able to show up in that particular way. And how do we show up with grace and compassion and cut each other some slack as we're learning new ways of working and communicating? And, I wonder what's to come of that. And I hope that as we focus on how to be more human in the digital age, I wonder how our technologies or the experiences that we're creating really allow for that humanness, that wholeheartedness to really shine through. And so I think that really helps us, everything that all of you shared, I think that gets us into our second block, where we're really starting to delve into the concept of empathy. And I don't know about all of you, but I have heard empathy tossed around quite a bit this year. And just like digital engagement, it can mean multiple things or different interpretations. And how do we make empathy actionable? So let's start with a set of provocations that all of us can respond to. So what is holding the nonprofit arts community back from equitable team building and welcoming ideas in our strategic conversations and decision making? And how do we bring all of our colleagues along in a fair and an even method of engagement? How do we develop a deeper empathy for our colleagues? What does that mean for us? Marie, do you want to get us started on this question? Or set of questions?
Yeah, sure. Okay, I'll dive in. Equitable team building. I think of it as, so equitable team building, welcoming ideas and strategic conversations, decision making. When I look at the nonprofit arts community, I think of the institution as a whole, and I think of it including not only staff, but board members, right? So it's like there's a whole ecosystem at play. And then there's also, the communities that we serve. I think the number one, I hate to say number one because there's many layered issues, right? But I think a foundational aspect of what is holding us back from truly being equitable is looking at the systems that perpetuate inequity, which in many cases in some of these institutions has to deal with the financial structure of how our institutions are running, and deal with it from that point. So we have to think about and analyze, like, what kind of an institution are we trying to run? What is the focus and goal, and how are we running this institution? And these are like, there's core folks and groups that have to be involved in that conversation, right? And people have to look very honestly and directly at how an institution is being run, and think about how equity translates across the board, starting from your financial kind of bedrock, because the decisions you make financially affect everything within an institution. So, and we've seen that play out within the last year, with some institutions laying off people, some not, some dipping into endowments, some not, and a variety of things happening in between. But you saw who was affected in the most part by, massive layoffs that happened all around the country, if not the world. A lot of times it was frontline workers, education staff, and visitor services staff happened to be like mostly the bulk of those kinds of impacted groups. So, and those are financial decisions, for example. So I would say it's starting from there, and thinking about equity it's not something you do while you're running a program. It's something you do in every aspect of your organization, from HR to finance to development, education, your security team, everything.
We'd like to build on that.
I think that's a really good point, Marie. The idea of follow the money, right? Which is the financial decisions are the ones that, who controls the finances, controls the narrative, and controls the decisions. I think it's a really interesting perspective I hadn't thought of. I think for me in this question, it's about the culture. I think we can say we should have more equitable programs, we should display more empathy, but we have to get back to the root cause. Not just what's the symptom, but what's the actual cause. And I would suggest that hierarchical structures are by definition inequitable. Museums and to some extent the country is built on this idea of success, this idea of climbing a ladder, and therefore the people who make it to the top are more successful than others, when really we have to reshape that culture. And I don't have really great solutions on how to do it. I'm not expert in that, but this idea of valuing everybody's perspective. So it takes place with racism and sexism, but actually takes place with everything, right? Understanding that no matter where you are in the organization, you have a perspective that is worth being listened to and considered. And rather than this very hierarchical, which is only the people at the top know the best and make the decisions. And in many organizations are making those decisions in private and without consultation. I think that that's something worth looking at addressing. I don't know how you make such a massive cultural change. I think that's extremely difficult to do, but I do think that that's at the core of this. And it requires self-awareness. It requires respect of the fact that other people have things and expertise that you don't have, or a perspective that is worth listening to that you don't have. And then I think that starts to solve a number of issues. But it's a long time coming, but it's worthy of a conversation right now.
Nikhil, did you want to jump in there?
Yeah, Maria, I appreciate you sort of bringing in the lens on the financial decisions that an organization makes, because budgets are moral documents at their core. For me, when I think of, what's holding back our communities from equitable team building and welcoming new ideas, I think at the foundation, the issues that I see, from all the conversations I've had with people at my organization, as well as outside my organization through the facilitation and writing that I've done over the past several years, there's an immense lack of trust that exists within our organizations, as well as with the communities that we're hoping to see more engagement with. When we think of the histories that we need to have a reckoning with, a lot of the communities of color that we want to see more engagement with can make direct connections, with histories that they're working to survive in their own communities and the buildings that they're walking into. So those aren't really hidden narratives to the folks that we're hoping to see more engagement from. So to build trust requires, empathy is one of the main components of building back trust. And how do we bring more colleagues into our process and into our programs? Building empathy requires a whole lot of listening, and it requires a lot of vulnerability. It requires us to ask questions and to share the answers to our questions of like, where are we struggling with? Where are we struggling? And with what are our biggest challenges? Asking other people and really hearing those answers for themselves and sharing from our perspectives what those answers are, because there's a pattern within many of our organizations of like putting on this sort of perfect image. We don't share anything until we've invested years and perfecting it's kind of done. But all the pieces along the way are kind of hidden, and we won't really be vulnerable. We won't really share things that are imperfect until they're perfect. And that's not really a process that will allow ourselves to build trust and to build empathy.
Sandra?
Yeah, I agree with what everyone's saying on the call, because I think that they are a part of a bigger issue that I see, which is one of skill set. And so you can have trust, you can know where the money is invested, you can know all these things, but if people don't have the skills to actually act on the issues and ideas that people are continuing to talk about, for example, having an uncomfortable conversation where all the weight is not on whoever is the person being affected, that's a skill set. And I think that that's a challenge that we often talk about, but we talk about the issues, but we also assign lengthier time, or we assign it to the least, the most junior person on the staff. Whatever those uncomfortable things are, they're usually assigned to someone who has the least amount of power and the most amount of career kind of vulnerability. So I think it's an imperative that we focus on skill set. And by that, I mean, we can have a group of people, and if they're at a senior leadership level and they are dealing with issues of trust, then how are the people below them that are reporting to them that I actually don't have a problem with hierarchy if it's not about power, if it's more about the level of work and the amount of work and the skill set that you need to address those issues. So my concern is that we have people that are not skilled to do anything beyond some of the transactional work or the academic work, quote unquote. And we need people who are able to move through those interstitial spaces that really is about the overall health and welfare of the organization. And so people literally are at a loss when you think about all of the letters that have been put out there, all of the posts on Change the Museum, the issues, the lawsuits, all these things are really coming from a place of lack of skill set around nurturing staff. That should not be a sideline skill set. That actually should be something germane to your performance. So as a result, I think one of the things that is hindering us is that we don't actually include those in our performance reviews. Those kinds of skills and capabilities are not measured. They're not nurtured, they're not measured. And so people constantly are in roles that they're ill prepared to do in the most holistic sense. So we fall back on, oh, I was not necessarily trained to do that. I came in as a fill in the blank, and I got promoted into this job and I never got trained to do those things. So I think skill set and ability as a crucial part of one's job, not as a feel good, let's kumbaya it over here in the corner, let's have a dialogue and feel safe. I'll give you an example. I was talking to someone recently and I said, what do you think is prohibiting people from doing A, from having these kinds of conversations, for pushing to ask for what they need to do that project? So the inability to actually do the job you were brought to do because you didn't feel comfortable asking or saying to that person, I actually need the answer and I've asked you 10 times and you haven't given it to me. So you just kind of keep everything moving. That ties to expenses, Marie. So we're wasting money because there may be a contractor or someone else involved. There's all these things that have ancillary impact, or I'd say critical impact. So when I asked, the person said, well, in some circles, people feel really, really comfortable having these kinds of having conversations. People flow and vibe back and forth. And then I asked the secondary question, which was, tell me what kinds of content is discussed in those forums. And it's usually like cat videos or some of these other kinds of, it's more the social space. And so I said, let's try and move some of that work, that comfort that we have in the social space, and trust that if we have those same kind of discussions or the same temperament in the work space where we're trying to get the work done to move us forward, will actually, people will do right because they actually have built this relationship over in the social space. So I actually think it's a skill set issue that's holding us back.
I couldn't agree with that more. In fact, empathy is one of many emotional skills, right? And that we have to bring into the workplace. And I think we need to recognize, so often we think of or we hear emotional skills referred to as soft skills, and they're kind of put to the side. And yet they are the hardest to define and actively practice. And we have to recognize that emotional skills are not taught in traditional curriculum or in the traditional, way into the workforce. And so there's a lot of individual change and development growth, right? It's not just the institution as a whole. Yes, obviously, but the institution is made up of humans, individuals. And we have to figure out how we show up and recognize our own behaviors and biases and what makes us tick. And at the same time, we have to make space to reflect and grow as a team or within multiple teams, right? Because these emotional skills are not something that's, one and done, taught, move on, attend a workshop, attend a training, and boom, you've got it, right? We know that's not it. So how do we figure out ways, to hook in to safely practice, empathetic leadership, to safely practice empathetic behaviors towards our colleagues? I think, Catherine, did you want to jump in there?
No, you're good.
Oh, okay. So
I would say measure it. Nothing is valued unless it's measured. Truly.
Totally.
I mean, those are the moral documents like Nikhil brought up. It's, and I think that in the chat, someone just said, how do you actually address this issue when the entire organization knows that it's an issue, but everyone's afraid to say it to their boss? So how do we hire people that actually, that means that the whole organization can't speak up. So who's leading, and leading as a way of nurturing, not like leading, I'm the power dynamic, but leading as a way of, like, that's what leadership is. It's nurturing groups of people and bringing them and creating the space for them to bring themselves along, not necessarily you like feeling like you have to pull all the strings. And so I think I think you're right. It's such an important point, Lauren. It for me, it's through assessment.
Mm-hmm. I couldn't agree more. These are great. I'm just so happy to be having this conversation with y'all and everyone who's joining and watching. I think values have a huge role in that too. You know, it's like your values as an organization, you can come together on those values, and then you have something kind of measurable or something that you can all agree upon. Because when you come together as an organization, everyone's coming from different backgrounds, different perspectives. You're creating almost like a new family, right? In the work you're doing in this new organization. So it's really important, I would say, to have like an agreed upon set of values. This is different, I think, than what you have in your mission statement and those kind of outward facing statements. It should be connected and informed by it, but your values are kind of like, how do we as a company treat one another, you know, and how do we do that? And that could be something measurable too.
Excellent. Oh, I could keep on going on this one particular thread for sure. But let's move into inclusion and access. So we've already addressed that we've got this massive opportunity to not repeat the mistakes of our past, including the recent past. So how do we ensure our work in the digital realm is built from a place founded in inclusive and accessible practices for our colleagues and our audiences or visitors? Are we ensuring diverse voices and our constituencies internally and externally of our institutions are part of our development and integration of the digital tools, services, and programs? And so with that, let's kick off this next block of conversation. Nikhil, would you get us started?
Yeah, sure. Again, I feel like it comes down to relationship building, like who's in the room when we're making content decisions, design decisions, development decisions, building relationships within our organization and pulling in voices and perspectives along the way. And digital is always something that's seen as happening really quickly. But I think oftentimes we need to slow down our process because hearing perspectives, listening, and sort of making an informed set of choices based on a wider variety of perspectives takes time and isn't something that we can just like come up with an idea to build an app and suddenly it's done, or come up with an idea for a social media campaign and it's suddenly done. All these things by their nature already take time. And I think there's a lack of understanding from people outside of the group of folks who do this kind of work of what the work really looks like and what it is. But even beyond that, we need to slow down and make sure that we're making informed choices every step of the way.
Who would like to build on that?
With this idea of informed choices and maybe intentional thinking as well, of this idea of awareness and making it a part of, I think with any change that anyone has to make personally or in organizations, you can't just say we're going to go do it. You actually have to intentionally think about it for a while until it just becomes second nature. And so I think, there was a time recently in the last couple of years where it was intentionally brought into focus that, there wasn't good representation of women in panels, right? In conferences, maybe not museum conferences, but technology conferences, right? And so there became this thing where people would refuse to participate unless there was diversity of sexes. Well, now we're starting to increase that conversation to be diversity of perspectives, intellectual diversity of race, diversity of experience, countries, all these kinds of things. I just brought this, this is as someone who has had that privileged background, it's been good for me to experience this idea of being much more intentional. So I was aware of it, but never as intentional as I was right now. And so very recently, we just launched a podcast this week, actually. And when we produced it, we intentionally went for people we don't know, people who are not the voices. So not the what I call the usual suspects in the museum world, right? Which is not, we just want to bring new voices. And so we have people on this from all parts of the world, but we may even, you know, just a teaser here, we may even have someone from Brunei, from a Brunei museum talking. And so, but these are not the usual names. And I think that that's a reflection of this intentional thinking that may not have occurred naturally without it.
Who'd like
I can jump in right now.
Yeah.
I think another part of it, I agree with everything Nikhil, Catherine has said. Also, I would add to that, just remembering that digital, in this widest sense of the word, is a tool in service of our work and service of whatever it is we're trying to communicate. To really think of who we're trying to reach, how we're trying to reach them, and really utilize the digital resources we have in a way that best serves our audiences and each other, you know, because we're also working together in these ends. And that totally is, you know, connected to being intentional and to be making informed choices and thinking about the time it takes to develop these projects. Yeah, I would just say, you know, centering your audiences, whether it's outside the institution or colleagues, and digital follows that path versus we follow the path of digital.
Yeah, thank you for that, Marie. I wonder about, I guess, how digital can, how do we avoid making digital and the practice of our digital work be a hanging chad? Sorry, I guess I'm dating myself because what was that, a couple of elections ago? But the reason I say that is because the way we are approaching digital should be philosophically tied into how we approach the institution's work as a whole. And so those values that you talked about, Marie, I think they actually, the way you live inside, my mother says, if you're ugly on the inside, people are going to see it on the outside. And so whatever your values are that you live on the inside, they should be the same values that you approach relationship building, as Nikhil mentioned, with whoever it is you're working with. And you should be clear, we're calling to talk to you because you are A, and we are working on a project about A. I think what institutions do when they're building these kinds of inclusive spaces and trying to figure out how to work with people they've never worked with before is that it's a one-shot wonder. And I think I'm okay with the one-shot wonder. I remember when I worked in Seattle, we had Roman art from the Louvre, and I was like, oh my God, this is such an amazing moment. The University of Washington's football team is having like a big moment. Let's get the coach from the University of Washington, who's this amazing thinker, but is literally just seen on the field, to talk about the gladiator and the gridiron. Therefore, making these like beautiful connections between people that love sports and love University of Washington and love the city and but those are people that would never come to see this show. And then the people that are art historians or the folks that would come to see this show get exposed to a great person in this community, therefore serving everyone. But the content is, you know, it's not dummying down, it's expanding the scope, right? And so do I have to invite the head coach of the University of Washington to serve on something all the time at the Seattle Art Museum? No, but I should be honest about the fact that we really want to have a sustained relationship with you. It may not look like this all the time. And I'm actually going to come to where you are when I don't actually have my digital microphone. I will just come and be in community with you. That's what I always say to people, no matter what platform we're working on, whether it's live, virtual, or in writing. How do you actually exist in the places where you want to be and know why you need to be there and know why they want you there, as opposed to it being a strategic approach to realizing your own individual skin in the game. And so I think that there's an opportunity here for us to actually talk about the overall practice of the institution, the values of the institution, and how it actually is realized in every part of our organization, including in digital. hopefully that answers the question, because I just feel like it really is related. And I'm trying to avoid these like siloed kind of moments. But yeah, and I agree with Nikhil. I think we need to all trumpet the fact that institutions feel like, you know, and I always said, I've said this for a long time, if the show is successful, it's all art and curatorial. If it's not successful, then it is the failure of marketing, communication, education, digital. It's everybody else's fault. And so I think that if we have this holistic approach to the content and we think about it in this way, we will be thinking about constituencies and inclusion in a real deep way.
Amazing. You know, as a technologist who has spent the majority of my career working in really highly regulated industries, I've always felt uncomfortable with the phrase, you know, fail fast and break things. That's never sat well with me. And I think this call, you know, for more sacred spaces, for more time to reflect and take a, you know, a more considered approach. You know, what are the rituals that we're creating internally? And so often I come back to, we are getting more curious about our audiences, our visitors, yet we're not really turning inward on our own institutions and getting curious about our own behaviors and our own ways in which we gather and make space and prioritize. And so I think now is the time, you know, to think about what can we do to carve out time and space to make sure that all voices are included, that multiple perspectives are, you know, included, and that while it's uncomfortable, that multiple truths, you know, can be held all at the same time, all at once. And how do we make that happen? And so before we hand it off and go to our audience, those that are watching us, and go to their questions, which folks that are watching, please use the Q&A and go ahead and start putting in those questions for us to answer. Let's talk about how we make this actionable. Like, what do we do in order to have a more collaborative spirit? How might we take what we've learned and are learning about developing empathy, diversity, inclusion, and access within digital to take purposeful action and work together to move beyond a one-size-fits-all engagement approach? So, Catherine, you want to take that one first?
Yeah, I think I come back to a really sort of pivotal moment in my career, an experience that I had, which was nearly 25 years ago, which really taught me a lot about inclusion and diversity and the value of it. In a way that, you know, and so we're going back to the mid-90s, it still felt very, you know, pulling on the heartstrings and maybe not really understanding. So I had a wonderful leader, and we were running a very large project in Australia, and she intentionally brought together a team that had a mixture of, I was a technologist, technology and marketing, who struggled to understand each other, a variety of ages. Seriously, there was somebody there from every decade, 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, and a diversity of sex, a diversity of race, a diversity of intellectual differences. And we all met every Thursday with lunch in the conference room, and there was about 25 people. And the only rule was you had to respect other people's opinions. And it was, for me, for my career, it was a pivotal time, because I learned to respect marketing, right? In a way that technologists sometimes are taught not to. And vice versa. I'm sure that marketing understood more about technology than they ever did before. But bringing that together, the only rule was you couldn't, you know, go away into the hallways and be like, I don't really like that person, right? And this was a pivotal moment in my career, and one that I have carried through for the last 25 years and has been really instrumental. I think there are a lot of lessons there in terms of how you can bring that to how we actually operate our organizations, intentionally bringing that level of diversity to the conversation and bringing the rules about respect, to bring this idea of getting out of your bubble and seeing more.
Who would like to expand upon that?
Yeah, I would say Exactly. It's like you have to have the conversations in in the buildings with the people or even outside of the buildings. You have to talk. It starts with talking, but it's talk that is then when we're getting into like the action of it, that those conversations you described, Catherine, were influential in how people then went back to their desks and like made decisions about like, okay, should I send this to marketing or not? You know, is this something that they can work on right now? Do they have the bandwidth? Or maybe I need to reframe how I'm thinking about even this project. It just helps you to understand each other. So conversations, even the conversations we're having right now, I know I'm going to take some things back to my team, to my museum, and put some of this into action. So conversation should not be discounted as a part of like the action. Also, I would think that it's challenging. It's so challenging. I mean, we're having these conversations now in my museum as well. Just had one with my immediate team, and we were all kind of like at this moment where we're like, okay, we're tired of talking about this particular topic. Now we're like, what can we actually do? Right? So we've already said like, we like this about our mission statement, or we don't like that, et cetera, et cetera. But like, what are we actually going to do about it? So now the next step, I guess, just giving a more kind of concrete example, is we're going to think about like, what are the things that we can do within our own practice as educators? Do we want to now implement land acknowledgement statements within the presentations that we make across our county? Is that something we see that we can do, and the value behind it? And you know, that's like a concrete thing. We're actively like, okay, we're gonna try to do this. We're gonna work on this, and really understand why we're doing it and doing it in the best way we possibly can, and more things from there, right? But it's like the conversation is such an important part of it. And then after you reach that limit, you're like, I can't talk anymore about this. Then you start to like create these small achievable goals or tasks, however, you know, whatever word you want to use. But it's not easy. I'll underscore it by that. It's not easy, but it's well worth it. Like most things.
Who would like to? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so we've talked about like relationship building, and in the context that Sandra articulated, like the mutuality of it, um, building relationships with the sense that like each party has something to get out of the relationship. So once we've sort of built a foundation for ourselves in relationships across our organization and outside, a decision to embark on a new digital thing should always be founded on solving a specific problem. We should be really clear and articulate of like what problem we're trying to solve with this new project, with this new initiative. Who does the problem affect, and why are we the ones to solve it? So I want to like put that out there in the context of like, you know, recognizing that I come from an organization that has like a team of engineers and designers and producers and stuff, and recognizing that there's other organizations that have like one freelancer who's doing all of it, right? Over the past year, like a lot of attention has sort of been pivoted to the folks that are doing the digital work. So there's a lot that sort of folks in our seats are navigating right now. So having a clear purpose and having a clear sense of the problems that we're trying to solve with a new thing, with a new idea that we have, will make the project more productive. And it will also sort of be respectful of the capacity of the people that we're bringing these projects to. I also want to use this opportunity to come back to one thing Catherine mentioned about massive cultural change, because we're talking about changing the ways that we operate across our organizations. And how do we do that when our organizations are so big and the issues are so long-standing and so fundamental? I think massive cultural change, like the tipping point by which things kind of start trickling out quickly, is actually not very high. You know, like the tipping point could be 20 to 30% of our staff, like changing the ways that we behave with each other and operate with each other around very specific ways. And once we reach that tipping point of just even 20 to 30%, oftentimes that's all it takes to trickle out to the rest of the organization. So yes, like we're talking about really big, really fundamental things, but if we sort of begin with ourselves and like even pick 2 other people to invite into taking this work on with, and sort of like committing to doing it on a regular basis and building from there, it isn't an insurmountable task to make huge cultural shifts within an organization. Like I said at the beginning, change can happen really, really fast if we're invested in it.
Yeah, I would just say, Catherine, were you going to say something? Sorry.
No, sorry.
Okay. I would just say that if the US government can institute the CARES Act overnight, I mean, there's some other stuff that can happen, you know, on a daily basis at some places, right? Like it is the, you know, it brings into question why aren't other things being addressed, you know, from a governmental point of view, right? So one of the things that I try and do is like keep it simple. Literally, I'm totally like, oh my goodness, if I were watching myself in a movie right now, which I find to be the easiest way to have commentary, because we all love screaming at the screen, like, you know, run faster. The person that's going to get killed, usually a Black male in the beginning of the movie. But you know, the person is going to get killed, or someone who's trampling over something, or the person in a relationship, don't do that. Don't do, you kind of scream at the screen, right? And so I'm always thinking like, what if this situation were on a screen? What would I be saying? Because it kind of also creates a little healthy distance for yourself. And so I often ask people stuff like that. The other thing I would say is that I think we actually have to have a different level of urgency around some of these things we're talking about. We act like everything has to take a 13-part process, when in the recesses of the institution, these conversations have been going on in great detail forever. But then when they come to light and leadership says, let's go ahead and act on this, then we have to go through a 30-part process. And I'm like, to what? To arrive at the same resolution or same issue that or solution that you arrived at 13 other times when you brought in those 3 consultants 4 years ago, the consultant last year. You could even just do a data append on any given topic with other people who have more money than you and ask them, how did you address this? Big, small, whatever, and then bring that together and then solve it. So I feel like we actually sometimes get in our own way around moving towards these spaces. And we want to use the professional space to only have the emotional discourse. We want to use the professional space to only have the emotional discourse. And so in my career, I have found that people often use those spaces as therapeutic spaces versus, which we need, but it often doesn't result in an action that will change and shift the culture, activities, processes, and procedures and policies, which I'm most interested in, at the institution. And so how do we actually look at this? And we could also look at every problem we're trying to solve as having several solutions with several people that are not the same people, or several groups that are not the same groups, being the custodians of solving those issues. So it doesn't rest in one particular area. From a digital point of view, I also don't like the idea of fail fast and break things, because I think that comes from a seriously privileged space, like hyper privileged space. Like I have the ability to just be wasteful. And so I don't encourage that. And I think that people have taken on this idea of, you know, encouraging failure as a way, in some cases, to get out of solutions or get out of solving things, because you could just keep failing. But not everyone has the privilege of being able to fail all the time. And so how do you actually learn from these things? Do some R&D up front so that you actually know a bit more, and you can actually reduce the amount of failure. Failure I have no issues with something happening, but I think that people often need to, or we could benefit from everyone learning from those mistakes, learning from the failures. And I think that's across everything. It's not just digital, it's across, like you got burned a few years ago when that exhibition happened and, you know, the indigenous people were like, you know, nailing into the wall. Learn from that and transfer that learning somewhere else. It's not necessarily even about that particular issue. It's about your practice. So for me, this all goes back to skill set practice. And I think we need to work on those pieces. As we hire new people, they should come with a skill set. That those that are at the institution that need to gain this skill set should have training. And there should be a line by which we actually make decisions about how we move forward. But I think that there's a huge opportunity for us to look at how this is built into the various components of our organization. I mean, I'm going to be a broken record around that skill set building into the organization. It should be a normative part of how we work. And I think the outcomes of that great work and practice actually yield what we all desire. I think people are also on a treadmill. So I asked an organization I'm involved with recently, why do you want to do this diversity, equity, inclusion work? And they said, well, we've done these things. No, but why do you want to do it? Like, what is the problem? If you have done all these things, what are you solving for? Like Nikhil said, and frankly, they couldn't answer. And they went back and they started answering those things. And they could line up what they had accomplished. And then I asked, what actually failed that you tried? What did not work? Because these folks are proposing the exact same thing we did 2 years ago at that organization. And so how do you actually be honest about the discussion? So people want to trust without honesty. I'm going to stop there because I could just, you know.
And before we open it up to the Q&A, you know, I'll just echo what's been shared and say, I really encourage a collaborate in place approach. So start where you can. And I think where collaboration breaks down is because we may not have the tools, the skill sets to communicate. And so especially right now, when we don't have the luxury of, you know, running into each other necessarily in a physical space, you know, how do we over communicate, right? How do we narrate our work? How do we explain, you know, why is it I'm doing this thing? Why is it I'm making this decision? Right? Because there's a lot of pent up energy and emotion because we don't see, you know, why the thinking, right? We're not working out loud. And so we make up these stories and then they get perpetuated, right? And it causes a lot of friction. And I think just to bring in, you know, the digital aspect here, you know, specifically, you can collaborate in place with the tools that you have, no matter what size your organization. Like, you do not have, like, I hear people say all the time, well, if only I had fill in the blank, right? Teams, Slack, you know, as an intentional community. When in reality, they could start practicing that active communication, empathy, leadership, you know, collaboration with the tools that they already have. So don't put that work off, right? So
can I just say, Lauren, the one thing that I think I wanted to say earlier that I didn't say is that there's a lot of this kind of collaborative work is in existence at most institutions. People have been doing it for quite some time, but they may not be the groups that are considered the most important groups. So it may be the community engagement group that does very well at building relationships. They sustain partnerships. They're the people that if you want folks at they can pick up a call or send an email, set up a call, send an email, and get hundreds of thousands of people in your front door quickly. And for whatever reason, I think that every time some crisis happens, we feel like we have to start from scratch. And I would encourage us to look within and find the groups that have done this work well already, and actually lift them up and acknowledge them and highlight their work and encourage other people to take insight from them and collaborate with them because they actually have done it already. So that for me is, I think, a really important way to actually use existing resources as well.
That's a great point. I think we really need to acknowledge that when we say new ways of working, it's not necessarily new for a lot of people. So what can we learn? What are those insights that we can bring, not just from digital to digital, but from the physical to the digital and vice versa? So let's go ahead and start to answer some of our questions. We're not going to have time to answer them all. We'll take the next 10 or so minutes to do as many as we can. So I'm just going to invite my panelists, as I read through the question, jump right in with an answer, build on it. We'll move to the next. So first one is, my org is trying to administer grants more equitably by, in part, working to reach rural areas. However, digital advertising avenues are heavily city focused. How can we get the word to the rural areas, also territories such as Guam? Anybody can weigh in on that?
I mean, initially, a part of me just wants to say, get out there and go there. Not everyone can be reached through like digital signage. But I will say like the power of social media is pretty like impressive and epic, I wouldn't discount, like, of course, Facebook and Instagram and like Snapchat and everything else that exists out there. But depending on, it sounds like you might be far from some of these places, but I would say, if you can't go yourself, make local connections, because the folks that are there on the ground, like in the community, that are going to be your best, those are going to be your best advocates, and they know the community, they are the community. So like without knowing more details than that, I would just say like reach out to the community first, find out what they need, what they're looking for, and let them know like, and this is what we have to offer, and see if it matches up.
Anyone else? All right, I'm going to move to the next one. In regards to the points about financial decisions, how can we more effectively engage with funding structures in a way that speaks to our aims of equity? How do we even begin to reconcile the dirtiness of most large funding structures in this late capitalist moment with trying to realize institutional structures and projects that have equity at their core?
That's a hard one. Does anyone want to jump on that one? I have more thoughts. Maybe I have more questions to add to that one. I would say that our values and this, these idealistic statements that we set for ourselves within institutions, I think those can be the kind of things that will kind of guide or push us, maybe even shove us in the direction that we should be going. When we get to those moments of like, okay, are we going to accept money from, sponsor or donor A, B, or C, where is this money coming from, et cetera. I think we have to go back to our values, our mission statements, and really look at those and make the tough decisions and realize that, we have set this path for ourselves. And if that's truly the work and space we want to be in, then those are the decisions we have to make. And again, like depending where you're at in the institution, depending how much, influence you have, of course, will kind of change that dynamic too.
I'm not sure I'm completely qualified to answer this one, but I would just say that, we have to I think we've learned out of COVID that we have to be much more financially resilient as organizations. And that potentially means looking at different funding structures. Certainly, the more that we can control, the more that we can equate them with our values. Other industries that potentially have had more power have been able to dictate more that I don't think this industry can as easily, but certainly worth considering. Terms such as around climate change, those kinds of things, and won't work with people who don't meet certain criteria. We may not yet be there with philanthropy, but it's definitely worth thinking about diversity of funding, maybe less reliance on some of these things that are at odds with our values. Yeah, as I said, I'm not quite sure that I'm completely qualified to answer, but that's kind of my thoughts there. Is this financial resilience is maybe at the core of it.
I would say that I think a couple of things. One, that the way that we're talking about partnerships and collaboration, that could be done between organizations to actually look at how we effectively engage funding structures. So, you know, the Keenan Charitable Trust came to me to talk with me about like funding in New York. And I was like, here's a list of like 20 something organizations that I think you should support. You may not support us at the Met, but you should support all these folks. This was when I was at the Met. $6 million later to 21 organizations who then also had resources to work together over time. They just received, they're receiving additional support, and they've all those organizations collaborate to actually realize collective impact work, to collective thinking, collective learning, professional learning communities. And so it actually, because we were trying to figure out how do we work together, it actually shifted the dynamics of things. The other thing is that I think it's important to consider what exactly may be a different approach to funding, like who are the unusual suspects that could support the work? How do you do possible crowdfunding? You know, how could you do for a project and have it be a discrete time-based project versus, and it's funded by the quote unquote people, versus everything having to be a giant grant proposal and all these other things. I do know that a lot of funders are trying to think differently also about how they address equity in their practice, because they're being held accountable to the same standards that cultural institutions are as well at this moment. So I think that there's something to be said about that as well. I don't know if that answers the question, but I think that partnerships in these ways are also helpful. Particularly given that funders are really like knowledge brokers. They collect all this data from all of us. And then we kind of, there's a parent-child relationship or like this really strange dynamic, and how can we shift that and have them see us also as knowledge brokers is an important, maybe an important thing to consider.
All right, we are now in our lightning round. So as your last comments from each and every one of you, I'd like for you to answer this question. How do we impress upon our respective boards of trustees the need for culture change and growth within our institutions? So many issues discussed during the session are influenced by decisions made by our board members. So in your last final thoughts, how would you like to answer or respond?
I think it's what we've said about the rest of the organization. It's about bringing awareness. So I don't think it can be just come to the board and say, we must be like this. It's about how do we help them understand through concrete experience. That's potential. So this idea of awareness, getting out of a bubble is sort of my recommendation. I'm not sure whether boards are open to that, but that's what I would suggest.
Who would like to go next? Lightning round. Marie, go for it.
I'll go. I'll take it. I would say we have to be the best possible advocates we can be. And I think empowering your teams of people to also be those advocates. Like, we all have different interactions with our board members. It could be as simple as like you're in the elevator with them, or it could also be you're in a scheduled meeting. But we need to advocate. I think advocating with data, advocating with examples of the work we do, constantly inviting and including them to see, not just hear about, but to see our work in action. I would say those are the things that we can do. And those are things that I'm working on all the time, because again, not going to sugarcoat it. It's not easy. It's not easy. You know, got a million things to do, but you have to remember, let's invite the board members to these programs, talk to them about it, share, find out what they're thinking about. You know, what are their other interests outside of maybe the support to your organization, but just advocate and empower everyone around you to advocate.
Yeah, I'll echo that. From where I sit, I'm not really connected with our board of trustees. Like, I don't have connections or relationships with anyone there. But the question is sort of framed in a way like, how do we convince this other group of people that this thing is important? And in general, like, I'm not interested in investing my energy in convincing other people, right? Like, I'm more interested in modeling like what the outcomes of change are by by just doing it. Sort of, what's that phrase of asking for permission later, right? Like I generally try to change my practice and operate in ways that I believe are equitable, that are beneficial to the organization, to the people around me. And the outcomes will show that the ways that I'm working are actually better for the organization overall. So I don't really need to invest my energy in sort of articulating arguments and convincing people to come to this other place. And just sort of, I prefer to just do it.
Sandra, you have the final word.
I would say infiltrate the board with the people that share those values and are good ambassadors for it, and also believe that resources should be put behind it.
Amazing. I would like to say thank you for this inspiring, energizing conversation. We could go on, I think, for quite some time. So I'm going to hand it over to Monica to give the official goodbye and thank you.
Thanks, Lauren.
Hello, I'm Monica Valenzuela, Program Manager for AAMC and AAMC Foundation. Thank you all for joining our program today, and a special thank you to Lauren, Marie, Sandra, Nikhil, and Catherine for sharing so generously your experiences, your expertise with us today. We're also grateful to our colleagues. We know you're out there at AAM, AAAM, AAMG, AAMD, MAC MCN, One by One, and University of Leicester, all for your continued partnership and dedication to hosting these important discussions. I saw a couple of questions in the chat. A recording of today's webinar will be available on our website. Drop that link in the chat for everyone, and available on our YouTube channel shortly. We hope that you're able to join us for the 2 future sessions in this series, which are slated for January 19th and February 24th. Registration for those is available and accessible. We'll drop that in the chat right now as well. Thank you all again. Stay well, and join us again soon.
Great.
Take care.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.